you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Welcome to this is Chris Voss of the Chris Voss Show. I tried to do a long lead and I failed. Welcome to folks to the Chris Voss Show, folks, my family and friends. We certainly appreciate you guys being here and being part of the darn show already. There you go. We'll let her do her part, as always. We appreciate you guys coming by. The Chris Voss Show is the family that loves you but doesn't judge you, at least not as harshly as your family, because they never loved you anyway. That's why you have the family of the Chris Voss Show, because we love you. We don't judge you harshly, unless you're evil, and there's always a place for you here. As always, we bring the smartest authors, the brilliant minds, all the people that walk this earth and bring you their cathartic moments, their lessons of life, everything they've learned, and they deliver it to you on this beautiful plate that we call the Chris Voss Show. And you can indulge in their knowledge and internalize it and then go poop it out. Yeah, that's probably the wrong metaphor that I should have used on going down this road. So we have another amazing author on the show today, and we're going to learn about love, damn it. Or else. I don't know what that means. Today we are interviewing the author of the newest book that came out December 8th, 2023, Learning Love. Build the best relationships of your life using integrated attachment theory. We have Thais Gibson on the show with us today. We're going to be talking to her about her amazing book, her insights, and all the stuff that she can teach us as well. She is a relationship expert that has been recognized by Bloomberg News, Psychology Today, and various other outlets for her revolutionary work in integrated attachment theory. Throughout her career, she's worked with thousands of clients and helped them to positively transform their lives, relationship goals, and she has over 30 million views across her social platforms and is certified in 13 different areas of therapy, including cognitive behavioral therapy, neuro-linguistic programming, and transpersonal psychology. I'm just having problems pronouncing things today. My brain's clearly melting at this point. By combining traditional psychology methods with a research finding for her practice, she has created cutting-edge techniques to help people realize true and significant changes in their life. Welcome to the show, Miss Gibson. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here with you.
Thanks for coming. I'm just flubbing the whole front end of the show at this point. I'm just befuddled, I think is the right word. So give us your .com. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
So people can find me at personaldevelopmentschool.com.
There you go. And then you have a huge YouTube channel. You're popular on the Insta, as the kids call it.
Yeah, so I'm at Personal Development School Thais Gibson on YouTube and at Personal Development _school on Instagram.
There you go. And so to give us a 30,000 overview of your new book, Learning Love.
So basically, learning love is about how we can change our attachment style. So our attachment style is something that basically is the subconscious set of rules we have about love. It's actually one of the most researched and scientifically backed concepts in psychology. It was originally developed by John Bowlby out of Cambridge University. And it talks a lot about how we basically form our understanding of how to give and receive love through our caregivers as children. And a lot of the research that I built upon was, okay, everybody has an attachment style. There's 4 main attachment styles. One of those attachment styles is secure and healthy, and 3 of them are insecurely attached. So they're the anxious, the fearful avoidant, the dismissive avoidant. And basically, if we grew up with an unhealthy attachment style because we saw dysfunctional dynamics in our upbringing or childhood, what do we do about that? How do we actually change it? So the body of work that I've developed, and we've actually worked with more than 40,000 people through our programs, is how can we become securely attached in the shortest period of time possible? Because statistically, secure people report the most long-lasting relationships, but also the most thriving relationships where they report actually being happy. So the entire book is about how to first recognize your attachment style, but then how to move the needle from being insecurely attached to securely attached.
There you go. You want to be that securely attached person.
Exactly.
So that sounds important. I took your quiz, and it basically said I was unlovable and unlikable, and that I should move to an island and just die alone, basically.
The quiz did not say that.
Is that one of the attachments? Just leave the rest of humanity alone and die alone. No, it actually said I was securely attached, so clearly I cheated the quiz properly.
To yourself. Yeah.
I've been dating. I've been single for all my life, and I've been dating in relationships all my life. I'm kind of a pro dater, you could almost call it. I have my Playboy years, and so I've done a lot of dating, and I have a really healthy mindset to it. In spite of it all, you would think that I would be really jaded by now, but approaching with a healthy mindset works. But so if you're in one of the other three levels, there is a way to save yourself and go through these levels, evidently.
Exactly. And I'd love if you're open to it for me to just start by going through the 4 attachment styles and what they mean, so listeners can actually hear, oh, that one's for sure me, or that's my spouse, or that's my child, or my parent, or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Please do.
Okay, perfect. There's the secure attachment style, which historically was about 50% of the population. It looks like that's sort of downtrending the past couple of decades. And securely attached individuals, as I mentioned, report the most longevity in relationships, but also actually being fulfilled in their relationships. And then securely attached children, when their attachment style first develops, receive a lot of what we call approach-oriented behaviors in childhood. So when their caregivers are, around them, they're very approach-oriented. If the child cries, they go towards them. They are attuned. They are present. They're trying to actually understand the child's needs and how they can soothe them. And it sounds like a small thing, but it has a really big impact, because if a child receives that kind of consistent approach-oriented behaviors, they learn it's safe to express my emotions to others. It's okay that I'm vulnerable. I can rely on people. I can trust them. And my needs and emotions are worthy of being seen and met. So they learn these really healthy patterns that as adults cause them to have healthy modeling for how they're supposed to interact with other people. And also they feel worthy and confident to receive healthy love from others as a result. That's the secure attachment style. Then we have the 3 insecures. You can sort of imagine them as being on a continuum. At one end of the continuum is the anxious attachment style. Anxious attachers, they basically grow up in a childhood where there's a lot of love and care, but a lot of inconsistency is this overarching theme. So an example could be that parents are loving, but they do separate, and one parent is inconsistently there. Or a better and more common example is parents are very loving, but they work a lot. So parents are there, and then they're gone. Love is there, love is gone. Love is there, love is gone. And all the ways that we're wired and we have attachment trauma, it doesn't have to be big T trauma. It doesn't have to be like extreme. It can be small T trauma, because repetition and emotion is actually what fires and wires our brain, our neural networks and neural pathways. And so if we have consistent small T trauma of feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't get that consistency around love, it will cause somebody to have these big fears of abandonment as an adult. Anxious attachment styles go from, this childhood of inconsistency to, as an adult, constantly being on the lookout because they keep feeling like they're going to be abandoned. So their big wounds and fears in relationships are, I will be abandoned, I'm going to be unloved, rejected, disliked, excluded. And they cope with this as adults by trying to constantly maintain proximity and keep getting closer. So I'm not sure if you've seen somebody like this, but you'll see that anxious attachment styles, they may call a lot, they may text a ton, they may get very slighted if there isn't a lot of calling and texting, and they mean so well, but they often accidentally push people away because of coming on so strong and so fast. Have you had an experience with anybody like this?
I've definitely had the person who texted too much and, was wondering what I was doing all the time. I think twice I had someone break into my home because they thought I was someone else. This is after a breakup too. But yeah, and if guys do it, it's seen as really needy, which really turns women off too.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for anybody, right? Like I think that when men do it or women do it, I think that it accidentally pushes people away. And unfortunately, all of our attachment styles usually become self-fulfilling prophecies until we work to change them. Because exactly what we are afraid of happening will be the same thing that we're attracted to. So I'll come back to the other 2 attachment styles, but just quick caveat here. If we go down the rabbit hole, our subconscious mind works very hard to maintain its comfort zone because it's survival wired at the end of the day. None of these patterns are conscious. Nobody's, I'm going to call many times and I'm going to fear abandonment all day. Like, they're not conscious choices, they're subconscious pre-existing programs. Your subconscious, as much as your conscious mind can observe that and be like, oh, I probably call too many times, I shouldn't do that. Your conscious mind can't outwill your subconscious. So for anybody who's anxious listening, if they've had the experience of being like, I'm going to put my phone in the other room, I'm not going to keep texting or calling the person, but then they keep going back and giving in, it's because you have these subconscious programs. So what happens is even though consciously we're like, this isn't healthy, this isn't working, anxious people often are most attracted to people who are likely to abandon them. They're attracted to dismissive people. Why? Because they are self-abandoning all the time. And so that's their biggest comfort zone of familiarity. We are most attracted to people over time who mirror back to us the subconscious comfort zone we have in the relationship to self. So as an example, if somebody's anxious, they're constantly dismissing and avoiding themselves, focus so much externally on other people. And so they're also going to be attracted to people who don't focus on them and who are dismissing and avoiding their feelings, needs, and boundaries, because that's how they show up to self.
There you go. Yeah, isn't it interesting how these things are self-fulfilling prophecies? Like, you see people, I've lived long enough now and I've dated enough where I'll meet women. I only date women, so if whoever's dating guys, you can figure out what that is about. But when I meet women, you'll see a pattern through their exes where they've dated maybe somebody who was always dismissive of them or whatever. It's the same. I'll see that in the Chad chasing sort of things that are going on right now, where women are chasing these Chads, and they're I think about, I don't know, my estimate is, and it's not scientific, about 95% of women complaining right now on social media about dating and men not giving them emotional commitment is really just Chad chasing, and Chad's not giving their commitment because they're not. And anyway, that's a whole different thing. But you see the patterns.
Exactly. So this is something we call, and I want to go back to the other two attachment styles in a moment, but this is something we call our relationship shadow. So often the things that we are most triggered by in other people, especially when we see a pattern in our history of these things, are the things we are always doing to ourselves first. So and this is a really important example for people. So I worked a lot with clients in practice for about 10 years. And what I saw when I was running my practice was, if somebody came out of a relationship with a narcissist, for example, like a true, not the throwaway term, pop psychology, or everyone's a narcissist, but like true narcissistic personality disordered person, when you look, and this is me I'm not victim blaming, because this person has this pre-existing patterning from somewhere else, so it's not their fault. But I never saw, no exception, somebody who was in a relationship with a narcissist, they were first people who were extremely cruel in their internal dialogue to self. Constantly violated their own boundaries to please others, manipulated themselves to be what people wanted from them, and didn't empathize with their own feelings, hyperfixated on other people. So their subconscious mind is already doing this, and thus they are a match to somebody like that. Because when somebody comes along who's a narcissist and they violate your boundaries and they manipulate and they are not empathizing with you and they're mean or cruel, the conscious mind says this is unhealthy, but the subconscious mind is the one making all the decisions. And it says, no, this is familiar. This is how we treat ourselves. So this is really comfortable. So we're actually going to invest in this. And it's so important for people to become aware of these concepts, because until we do, we're often having these pre-existing traumas from childhood or attachment trauma that lead us to be this way in the relationship to self, that then lead us to enter into relationships with these types of individuals that just re-traumatize. And so doing the work on our subconscious mind and healing these patterns is really important.
Yeah, does that play into the thing I've heard, women, where women will get into bad relationships that are toxic, and they'll stay there because even though for the rest of us, we're looking and going, that's really an ugly situation you got there. And maybe they feel that way too. This is horrible. It's comfortable to them.
Exactly.
Is that why?
Nailed it. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I want to go back really quickly and just do the other two attachment styles. So we did secure, we did anxious, just so people can hear themselves in this too. The other end of the continuum from anxious is our dismissive avoidant. So dismissive avoidant attachment styles, they grow up with this overarching theme of childhood emotional neglect. And as a result of this, it's not always over either. It's not, oh, parents are never there, children are alone in the house at 3 years of age. It's oftentimes parents are there. There's structure, there's stability, food's on the table at specific times, to school on time every morning. But if you express emotions, go into the other room, come back when you've got it together, or children should be seen and not heard, or don't be a crybaby, that's embarrassing. Like a lot of the messaging is such that it's like this part of myself as a human being is wrong. And so what happens is a dismissive avoidant adapts to that environment by basically divorcing the emotional part of themselves from how they ever really express themselves. And they work very hard to repress their emotions. And so as adults, they basically become the individuals who are afraid to feel too much. And they're very afraid of being trapped in too much emotion because as children, they felt trapped in a household a lot of the time where because we're biologically wired for attunement, if we couldn't get it and we're wired for it, it feels trapping and engulfing. So dismissive avoidant children develop wounds around feeling trapped, helpless, powerless, seen as defective or shameful if they express emotion, seen as weak if they're too vulnerable, and fear of being disrespected. And those will be the big triggers they have as adults. And they'll be individuals that we enter into relationships with. And then when we get too close, they get back. They leave early, they pull away as soon as the feelings get too real. And often they end up in relationships with more anxious leaning individuals. So before I go into fearful avoidant, the last attachment style, have you seen people like this before?
Yeah, I mean, the patterns of people doing that. I mean, I don't know if I did that in my relationships sometimes. No, I don't think so. I had pretty good relationships when I had them. But yeah, I mean, I've seen it all in dating.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of that in there, maybe.
There might be in my past. I mean, I didn't really get my trauma healed up till about age 50. So I'm 56 now. Yeah, there's a lot of, I was pulling a wrecking ball around for a while.
So maybe in the past there is a little bit of dismissive avoidance because you said you were always dating but not in serious relationships. So this is a little more consistent with DA, even if you did the work now. So I was a fearful avoidant, which is our last one, which is actually probably the most difficult attachment style for people to date. So I was the fearful avoidant. Fearful avoidants grew up in a childhood with the overarching theme as chaos. It can be, for example, that there's a really bad divorce, tons of fighting, but it can also be like a parent's an alcoholic or an addict or has a personality disorder. And so generally what happens is as a child, you never know what you're going to get. Will it be a good day? Will it be a bad day? Will it be a scary day? Will there be like all this animosity or will it be peaceful? And fearful avoidants get these really polarized associations about love. They have some really good positive experiences, but they also have some really scary or terrifying ones. So they basically share in both sides of the attachment styles. They have an anxious side where they're afraid of people leaving, but they have an avoidant side where they like need to keep people at bay. But they basically hyper flip-flop back and forth. So like before I did my work and became securely attached, I was constantly like flip-flopping in relationships. I would get close to somebody. I would really want that closeness. Then they would get close and I would be like, get back, stay away. And I would sabotage a lot. And it's you're very hot and cold, often very confusing to other individuals. But it's because if you grew up with these fears of, love is a great thing, but it's always going to end in shambles or there's always going to be chaos. It's like the more you love or the more you care for somebody, the more it scares you. And so the more you have to push it back. And so that's our last attachment style, which is fearful avoidant.
The 4 attachment styles. Now, it seems to me that like the attachment style is kind of an umbrella thing for various amounts of trauma that have gone on below. Is it really important to not only, know, let's say you're evaluating somebody or dating somebody, or maybe you're already in a relationship with somebody, is it important to not just know the attachment styles, but know what those exact traumas are? Because like sexual trauma from childhood, especially for women, is very different than, your dad didn't hug you enough. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And understanding the difference between those two and how you're going to have to approach or deal with that person or whether they've seen a psychiatrist is a really big deal. So how do you equate those two or manage those two?
Yeah, so I try to speak to the individual first. So I would say the first step is to understand your attachment style. If you're not securely attached, and to do the work, we can talk about like how to become secure. But there's basically some overarching themes. We have to recondition our limiting beliefs. So the fear of being abandoned or defective or weak or these fears that we have. We have to learn our needs. And because each person has very unique needs. Anxious attachments have a lot of like need to be reassured, certainty, validation, encouragement, deep connection. Dismissive avoidants need freedom, autonomy, independence. They also need appreciation and acknowledgement. They also need empathy, support, acceptance. Fearful avoidance need depth and novelty and intensity and growth and exploration and discovery and freedom. And, each attachment style has different needs, and we have to learn what ours are, because if we get into relationships with somebody of a different attachment style, we tend to all love the way we would need love. And so we're usually giving people needs that aren't necessarily landing with them. And I would make a very strong argument for anybody who's familiar with the 5 love languages. It's like Dr. Gary Chapman's work, that we have different ways we give and receive love: physical touch, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, and gifts. And people give and receive love. I would actually make an argument that no, our needs supersede the love languages, because I have a quality time love language. But if I'm sitting watching Netflix with somebody versus having a real conversation with them, that emotional connection need is much more important than just the quality time love language. So needs are a huge part of like how we actually feel fulfilled in relationships and fulfill in relationship with one another. So healing your core wounds, moving through your needs, nervous system regulation, boundaries, communication. We can break those all down, but those are like the 5 overarching themes to heal. And what I would say is we need to do our own work first. Make sure we're primed to be in a healthy relationship. We can also do the work in a relationship with somebody else, and that's fine. But the other part of it is I don't think it matters too much how much trauma somebody has. I care about, is the person willing to do the work on the trauma? When I was in private practice with clients, I would have people come in with all different backgrounds. Some people with exceptional big T trauma, tons of it. But if both people are willing to do the work, we can really heal from those things. It's really about, are people working on it? If somebody's not willing to do the work and adapt, and they're constantly bringing up their old trauma into their present relationship, that's where we really have those deal breakers that can make it really difficult.
Even with sexual trauma, It's pretty. I mean, there's extenuations to that. I mean, but I don't know. It's something people need to work on then.
Yes, and I really want to talk, if we want to stop there for a moment, I'd love to talk about that for a second on like kind of a detour. I worked with a lot of people with sexual trauma, and there's a huge growing body of research on something called post-traumatic growth that is extremely powerful and that really, really works. And it's where I did a lot of my training originally and really help people work through these painful experiences. And we don't have to go relive trauma all the time to work through it. We don't have to go back into the traumatic event and talk about it and feel about it and relive it. In fact, you could make a strong argument that actually, because the subconscious gets programmed through repetition and emotion, that actually wires the traumatic event and feelings further into our body and nervous system. Instead, how we heal from post-traumatic growth, like how we actually get into post-traumatic growth, is we change the ideas we have about ourselves because of trauma. So usually in sexual abuse trauma, people develop core wounds of I am trapped, I am helpless, I am shameful or defective, I am bad, and I am unsafe. And these core wounds, because we get imprinted by that experience so strongly, we project them out into all of our relationships. We constantly feel like, oh, I'm going to be unsafe, or I'm going to be helpless, or, and we can rewire these ideas and I can give a tool for that and everything, but these are changeable concepts. The other big part of post-traumatic growth is learning to meet the needs as adults that we couldn't get met in the traumatic experience. In sexual abuse trauma, we often didn't feel like we had the need met for safety, for certainty, for help or support, and for validation and acknowledgement of our feelings. And so when we can get really good at meeting those needs in relationship to self as an adult, and also get really good at rewiring those painful stories that we have about ourselves because of that traumatic event, it's tremendously healing, and it doesn't have to be something that takes decades to do. And the third major piece is if we can do some nervous system regulation work to get out of constant fight or flight, we're really building a tremendous amount of momentum, and it doesn't have to be something that entraps people for their whole life or affects their relationships for their whole life either.
There you go. That's what we want. So let me ask you this. What about, we've talked about emotions, and part of this is part of the four things. Do men don't live in their emotion, or at least they shouldn't be. They should live in their logic and reason and masculinity. Do men have trouble dealing with the 4 aspects, and how do those apply? Because showing our emotions isn't the most popular thing to do in our society. Sometimes in relationships, if you show your emotion to your woman, she's going to use it against you. It's going to be turned against you. How do you see that playing out with men, and how do men kind of, I guess, with masculinity, bridge this? Okay,
can we have a debate? You ready to debate?
I mean, I want to debate, but sure. I'm just asking how.
A friendly, loving, respectful debate.
Sure, yeah.
So I have done a lot of research into this for a long period of time. So there's a lot of talk in the world right now about like men always need to exclusively be in their masculine energy. Women exclusively need to be in their feminine energy. These concepts of polarity are true for points of attraction. So there's three major things that create attraction at the subconscious level. And again, our subconscious mind is responsible for 95 to 97% of all of our beliefs, thoughts, emotions, decisions. So like our subconscious is running our lives in the show. In the concept of polarity, it hits on the first thing. So the two things that we'll be attracted to early on out of all three are, number one, somebody who expresses your repressed traits. For example, if somebody's really assertive, because our mind seeks wholeness and equilibrium, it will attach to somebody and it feels like we're attaching to that trait as a byproduct. So if somebody's really assertive, when I first met my husband, for example, he was very assertive. I still had a lot of boundary work to do. So I was super attracted to that. I was like, oh, wow, he's so like assertive. He speaks up in real time. He's so good at this. So I was really attracted to that. What will happen with this, okay? Polarity is not going to be the thing that sustains a long-term relationship ever. It will actually be the thing that ruins it. So polarity is really important for attraction in the dating stage of relationships. Relationships have six stages: dating, honeymoon, power struggle, which we'll come back to, stability, commitment, and bliss. In the dating and honeymoon stage, polarity is working in our favor. We're like, wow, they're so this, they're so that. In the power struggle stage, if we don't integrate those traits and form a sense of wholeness, exactly the things that we were attracted to in terms of trait variety, we will resent the most. Wow. So what would happen, and this was my example, but I knew this, so it was easy for me to work on, is in the power struggle stage, the assertiveness that was so attractive in the dating stage is now he never makes compromises. Why doesn't he care about my needs? This happens to everybody all the time. People will be like, oh, they're so easygoing, it's so attractive. Power struggle stage hits, and now what do we have? They never make an effort. They never plan anything. They're so lazy. So yes, polarity is important for attraction, but that's not how relationships last. That will be the thing that sabotages relationships. What we need to do is actually integrate traits so that we have a sense of wholeness. Men are supposed to have this wholeness. They're supposed to have emotions and emote and have a healthy relationship to it. They will still lean more into their masculine energy, but they're supposed to be the sense of wholeness. Same with women. Women are okay to have times where they take charge of things or they're in their masculine energy. Yes, they may lean into their feminine energy. Biologically, that's a greater likelihood of occurrence, but wholeness and ability to interact with both sides of our whole persona as a human being is actually what allows us to move into secure connections and relationships. So that's a really important thing. And if we don't do that, exactly what we are polarized around will trigger us the most and be the thing in the power struggle stage that causes the most arguments, the most friction, and the biggest downfall of our relationship.
That's why I leave before the power struggle stage when I see it coming. No, I'm just kidding. No, so what is the power struggle stage? When does that usually take place, and how does it?
Yeah,
is it early on or?
Yeah, so it's a fantastic question. The power struggle stage, so generally the dating will be 0 to 6 months. It's the vetting stage. We get to know somebody before we make a commitment. If we make a commitment, it moves us into the honeymoon stage, which generally lasts about a year to a year and a half afterwards. Generally after that, so we're sitting at a year and a half to 2 years into the relationship, we hit the power struggle stage. For some people, it can be a bit earlier if they live together quickly or they're spending an extra, lots of time together really fast. But around that time period, it's the power struggle. The power struggle has a really powerful purpose. It's not just supposed to be like anger and fighting. The intention of the power struggle is we are supposed to learn each other's fears and flaws and learn to be vulnerable and have acceptance. And this is part of why being able to emote from both sides is really important, because we're supposed to learn. I learned in the power struggle stage, for example, that my husband is more sensitive to criticism than I realized. He's very stoic, so I didn't notice. But if I don't communicate more gently or kindly, he doesn't like that. So what did I learn? I learned, well, I love my husband. I'm going to be kind and courteous and thoughtful about the way I communicate. Instead of saying, hey, you didn't do this, I might say, hey, I would love if we can do this. Yeah. And just those little tiny things. And there were things that he knew that were important to me. I like when he plans things or is more intentional about things. And so I communicate that to him in the power struggle stage. If we don't communicate vulnerably and let somebody truly in, the relationship won't last. The rite of passage of the power struggle stage is to let somebody see us more deeply, more vulnerably, our fears and our flaws. And when we understand those things about each other and we're willing to make little compromises to be mindful and considerate of each other, this is how we get out of the power struggle stage and move into future phases. And what it does is it deepens the relationship from like the mask is on in the dating and honeymoon stage to the mask is off in the power struggle. And it moves us from more conditionally based love to more unconditionally based love because I'm now showing myself with less conditions.
Yeah. Is it like arm wrestling during this stage? Do I need to hire an attorney for the power struggle thing?
No. If done correctly, it's actually a really beautiful stage. There's more friction and there's a little more arguments and disagreements, but if we're willing to be vulnerable about stuff, it can be something that's like really, really rewarding.
Is there MMA cage matches for this? So basically you set up in the living room and we're gonna have the battles. Honey.
Only if you don't heal your attachment style.
Yeah, do that first, folks.
I'm just kidding.
So let me ask you this, because I took your quiz, and people should take your quiz. It's online. Do you want to give a plug to the .com so real quick for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's at personaldevelopmentschool.com, and there's a big button on the first page that says attachment style quiz, and it comes with a full report of all of the different parts of your attachment style.
There you go. And what was that joke I told yesterday? I basically took the quiz, and it explained why my mother abandoned me before conception. I wrote that yesterday. I'm going to use that in stand-up, I think. So basically, I watched your show on YouTube, and you've got so much content, and it's detailed and like how to. And basically every YouTube video is how to fix the stupid people you decided to be with. No, I'm just kidding. It's not really that. That's just, I'm being funny people. But it's like how to deal with somebody who's in the love language, or not the love language, but one of the four aspects, and what, how to interact with them and the different attributes of that. And I was watching a lot of videos, and like the first thing that came to my head as someone who's securely attached and healed is like, why are they putting up with that person in the first place? Just dump them and go find somebody healthy. So what's wrong with that thought process that I had?
That's a great question. So I will tell you, as somebody who was fearful avoidant, okay? So fearful avoidant has that avoidance side. Avoidants are known for kind of like jumping out of relationships. A big transformation I went through in my understanding when I became secure was I would be fearful avoidant. I would invest into people, get feelings, be attracted or infatuated, see something I didn't like, panic because I had all these fears around, I'm going to be betrayed or abandoned anyways. I'm going to be unsafe or trapped. And I would just leave relationships. So I had no staying power. In retrospect, when I did a lot of work on myself and a lot of reflection, a lot of those relationships, and everything for a reason, because I'm happy with where I'm at now, but just an interesting insight for me was like, so many things I would leave relationships over were actually very solvable problems if I just communicated. If I just said to somebody, hey, like that's a sensitivity for me. I don't like when you do that. Or, hey, like this is a boundary for me. Can you be mindful? If I just communicated vulnerably and actually shared my needs with somebody, all of those things would have been course corrected. So when I met my now husband, who I've been with for about 10 years, we actually worked on this stuff. I worked on communicating needs. So when there were things that otherwise I would have ran away from because I didn't know how to address conflict or have healthy communication or be vulnerable, I realized, wow, 99% of the things I would leave relationships over in the past were actually opportunities to bring us closer together if I just shared my truth with somebody authentically. And so I think there's a difference between not putting up with things that are unhealthy. Like we have our non-negotiables. I think if somebody's like speaking disrespectfully in relationships, or they're constantly canceling dates, or, there's things that like, no, you shouldn't keep pursuing the relationship. But did you talk about it first? Did you address it in a healthy way? Because a lot of things are really solvable problems. And if we have something that's important and we do the communication work around it and we solve the problem, it actually grows the relationship and deepens the connection. If we communicate and somebody's, no, I'm never changing that. I don't care about you and your needs. I'm not willing to make an effort. And there's no work done and there's no moving of the needle. Yes, then it's an important time to say, this isn't a good relationship for me. This isn't healthy. It's not what I'm looking for. And we have to honor that. But I think that like really important part in between makes a night and day of difference.
There you go. I like that. So communicate, people. Maybe don't ghost so much. Although it seems to have been going on since the 90s. I love how everyone thinks ghosting is like a new thing. My dating experience has been going on since the 80s or 90s. It's not.
People always ghosted. It's just trending. People talk about it now.
Yeah. It's amazing to me. People are all worried about it. Like, why did they ghost? They didn't like you. It didn't work out. Go find your person. Shut up. Leave it alone. I asked you this before the show. So I think I'm pretty healed on trauma, my childhood trauma. I cheated your quiz somehow and beat it and gamed it or something and came out securely attached. One of my challenges in dating, and I'm very particular. I've lived my life as a playboy. I've dated models. I've dated beautiful women that, you think, okay, they're beautiful women, so everything's going to be fine. But, sometimes there's a lot of internal damage there. And I've been really good at reading people's trauma. I've had psychologists on the show, and I've been like, you grew up with a single mother, didn't you? They're like, yeah. I'm like, how do you know? Because you just told me in about 10 minutes all the choices you made with your relationships. I've nailed it. I can talk to people and be like, you had sexual trauma as a child, huh? And so I can pick up on a lot of that stuff. I'm really good at after dating as many years as I have. So my challenge is when I meet people that have these three other types of relationship things, and if they have trauma or if they have whatever, I'm at the point where, I live the trauma relationships where you're like, hey, I got a bag of broken glass. Hey, I got a bag of razor blades. Let's get together and see if this shit works. And they had their trauma and I had mine. And now I'm kind of like, I don't really want it in my life. And I was joking with you earlier before the show. It seems like there's 10 people who are healed in the dating market. So how do I find somebody? Am I going to have to basically try and find somebody who has these other issues and see if I can help work them through it? Something I don't know.
Great question. It's such a good question. So I think there's some really important parts here. The first part is that we have to be really clear and intentional about dating. So I do think that when people have a lot of trauma that's unresolved, I actually think it's best for them as an individual to take some time and work through it on their own, because usually when there's a lot of big trauma, we then get afraid of being abandoned or betrayed or whatever it might be. And then that shows up and we get so distracted by the relationship that we don't have time for ourselves. I had a lot of big T trauma as a child, or a decent amount. And I took a big time out for 3 years, worked on myself, worked through things, did a lot of deep work. That was the most sacred, beautiful time of my life. I'm so grateful to myself for doing that. So, if anybody's hearing this and they have big T trauma or a lot of stuff, first of all, have that self-compassion. It's not your fault, but it is still your responsibility, even though it wasn't your fault. And so there's this really interesting caveat where it's we want to honor that. And I think that it's important to take some time, dig into that if there's a lot of trauma. The second sort of branch of this conversation becomes, well, you're probably not going to find anybody with nothing going on. Some people are going to have a little bit of boundary issues to work on, or they could communicate that, or even if they're securely attached, we may just have some stuff. And I think that there's this difference between, kind of like we talked about earlier, there can be flaw finding, which is I'm looking for perfection all the time, because and this is a common thing for avoidance, dismissive and fearful. And I'm not saying this is you at all, but just for anybody listening, it's sometimes what you'll see is people get afraid to have any issues. So they'll flaw find and nitpick. And that's an actual protection mechanism, because what's actually happening at a deeper level is if we feel disempowered to work through conflict, then we're I'm just going to avoid anybody with any imperfections as my means to avoid any conflict. And so I think that's an important differentiating factor. So what we're looking for in healthy dating is, number one, we need to know our non-negotiables. These are different for everybody. For one person, I had a client once and she had lung cancer. And so her non-negotiable was, I'll never date a smoker. But that's not everybody. Somebody will be I'll only date someone else who smokes, right? So we have to get really clear about ours personally. That's number one. Number two is we want to know our standards. So we want to know the things that matter to us. Somebody, for example, who travels a lot or is ambitious, or things that are personal, that they're not non-negotiables, but they're things that we value and we care about and we'd like to have as a part of the relationship. Then our dating stage is meant for vetting people. So many people are they go into dating and they're this person was attractive. I like them enough after the first date. I'm going to go all in and try to make sure I win them over and they like me. And it's hold on a second here. You need to be looking does this person know how to work through conflict with you? Does this person speak to you respectfully? Do you want the same things? Do you have similar morals and values? We have to be checking in with these things. And the framework I often get for people when dating is know your non-negotiables, know the standards and things that are important to you. And then go into dates where 1 or 2 questions every date that relate to these important things you'll intend to ask. It shouldn't be like you said earlier, like the FBI guy with the flag, like job interview on the first date, because everyone will get, it just feels pressuring and it will turn people off. But we also don't want to just go into dating people pleasing and abandoning what our important factors are for what we're looking for. So the healthy balance is, I'm going to know the things that I'm absolutely not okay with. I am going to know my standards, and I'm going to vet for quite a few months, 3-4 months, I recommend, of just getting to know somebody, having these discussions, seeing are these things, actual part of somebody else's personality that you're looking for. And also, we want to make sure that we're not just running from a red flag. Obviously, if it's a non-negotiable, hands clean, go in the other direction. But if it's a red flag, it goes back to this thing where it's like, if somebody just isn't texting you enough, for example, sometimes that's solved for just having a conversation. Hey, consistency is important to me in communication, and the person will show up or not. But that's the purpose of the dating stage, is you get to find out by having those honest conversations, vetting, and not abandoning your standards and needs in the process, so you can get to the bottom of, are you actually a good fit with somebody else?
There you go. Somebody told me a long time ago, and I don't know if it's true, so I want to run it by you, but they said, find someone whose highest value is integrity. My dad's highest value was freedom. It didn't work out for him having a family because he really wanted to be free. But, find someone who has integrity. And if you find somebody who's really high on integrity as their value, a lot of stuff will fall into place because they'll do what you said. They'll be like, okay, so we're missing something here. What can I do? How can we work together? I care about you and I'm willing to make that effort. Whereas, is that true, or do you think more so it's more about these 4 aspects?
I absolutely think that matters, like finding somebody with integrity for sure. But I think that integrity isn't the only thing. I think compatibility matters. And I think our ability to work through things, somebody can be of high integrity and mean, but if they've got a lot of unresolved attachment trauma and they have all these wounds and fears, they can be in integrity very well when they're not triggered. But if they have huge triggers from a lot of unresolved stuff they have to work on, then that can still cloud it and get in the way. And so I think it's really a bridge of both of those things. And I say this a lot in our programs, but I never cared when I was running private practice how much trauma somebody had. I really didn't. I would care, is the person willing to do the work? Because if they were, and maybe you could call that integrity, willing to show up and do the hard things and show up for those reasons. They may not be perfect along the way, but if somebody's willing to do that work, then that takes us a really long way.
Dude, you really want to, if you were unhealed and they were beginning that journey, that sounds like a tough journey to be on for an investment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and a lot of times, and sorry to interrupt you, a lot of times when this happens, people would come in to see me or come into our programs now, and they're coming in because they're in a marriage of already 20 years.
Wow.
And they've just found out about attachment theory, and it now explains a lot. And they're like, how do we deal with attachment styles? Or people are dating somebody and they're in love and they're just entering into the power struggle stage, but they've made a commitment to live together. They love each other. It's a year and a half, but now things are getting really difficult. And so there's a line, right? If you're just on a first date and you see all this stuff coming up, and you can see that person's not really working on it or trying to work through it, and you've done all that work, you may want to vet for that. That might be a non-negotiable for you, perhaps. And that's an individual decision. You might say, you know what, I'm wanting somebody who's also done the work, and I'm going to vet for that during the dating stage because I want to have this streamlined experience. And I don't want to feel like I'm in the role of a therapist at some point in the relationship. But a lot of people don't start relationships that way. Our attachment style also doesn't really show up a ton until we've actually attached. So often what you'll see too is people are all great in the dating stage. That's why we have to truly vet and ask tough questions. And then all of a sudden a year in, the power struggle stage comes up, or we've really finally attached to somebody and connected, and now the things come online. And so it becomes a very individual decision for people based on where they're at, the level of investment that they already have, and how big and how challenging those difficulties are.
Yeah, I think everyone has got little red flags and ticks. I think when I look at people and evaluate them, I evaluate them on, how can I live with this and can we work through this? There was somebody I took out recently, and, they told me they had PTSD from losing their husband. And I think there was some violence that took place in Mexico. And I just, And I went, yeah, I can't do that. Have you been to therapy? And they flipped out when I asked if they've been to therapy for it. And I was like, okay, clearly you haven't. And, so that's there's certain things that I've kind of learned. It's kind of funny. Over the years, I didn't know about any of this sort of stuff. And I worked off a blueprint thing, which it sounds like, from what you've described, a lot of this stuff is childhood blueprinting. So I would look for women that they had a healthy father in the home relationship who'd raised them. He set a good example for manhood and being a man. He was tuned into her needs and, he was there. I've also seen the converse of that where, daddy doesn't hug her enough and she ends up at Spearmint Rhino. But, I would look for women that had that sort of healthy things. In fact, if I could find a woman that had her parents were still together and still loved each other, like that was usually gold. And so that was kind of what I always used. But this stuff makes a lot more sense because it seems to explain a lot more things and make it so you can work. So for someone who's a secure attachment, I'm actually trying to search this on your website here and I put it in. Do I need to search the secure attachment videos on how to get along with everybody else?
There's some courses around that, like key pillars of a secure relationship. There's how to be with there's like secure and dismissive, secure and fearful avoidant, like secure with different attachment styles. But I think to your point, you're talking about this woman with PTSD who hasn't done the work, and God bless her, because obviously she went through a hard time. But, that's a point where somebody probably has to honor themselves and take a time out and do that work and focus on themselves and give themselves permission to be the center of their own universe for a moment, to be able to work through it. And I think it's a healthy choice that if you just bring up the topic or conversation because she brought it up and you're just inquisitive and then she gets angry, she's probably not ready for a healthy relationship at that moment. And that would be a secure vetting thing to say, look, I have compassion for this person and this isn't what I'm looking for at this time. And she, would hopefully have the opportunity to honor herself. So those are good decisions, right? And I think that when we're looking for securely, if you're secure and you're looking for other securely attached individuals, you can definitely look for two parents being together. But I think that can even be limiting because sometimes we have two parents together, but they're both emotionally unavailable and we have a really dismissive avoidant person, or we have two parents who are together, but they're still fighting all the time. And I think that it's important to highlight that a thriving relationship doesn't just mean that it lasted. If it lasted, but both people are miserable, I would call that an unsuccessful relationship because you're trapped in unhappiness. We're looking for, was there thriving, are there healthy skills modeled? And generally you'll see with securely attached people a few core things if you want to bet for them. They are vulnerable, but not too vulnerable all at once. They'll happily share things, but they don't overshare their deepest, darkest secrets the first date or two. Yeah. They tend to be consistent. They tend to be very pro-communication. If there's a conflict or problem, they will not shove it under the rug or avoid it. They will be approach-oriented. They will tend to honor and validate people's emotions. They actually have a healthy relationship to their own emotions. They're not necessarily overly emotional all the time, but they have no problem saying, I feel this way, or this didn't land well with me when you said that comment. I didn't feel very great about that. Can we work on it this way? So they'll be vulnerable and emotionally available. And so those are some really important pillars when we're vetting to look for if we're trying to vet for a secure attacher.
There you go. I put in your YouTube channel search secure attachment style. So I'm looking for the videos. Are you securely attached? And how can you put up with all these broken people? Darn it. They won't drive you crazy. I'm just kidding, folks. Those are jokes.
all insecure attachment people have their own superpowers too. I will say that they have some highlights in there, and it's just, I want to say too, your attachment style isn't this, oh my gosh, this diagnosis. It's just a subconscious set of rules that you've had about love. And so you can just modify some of the ideas you have and behaviors to become secure. It's not like a personality disorder that it's so hard to heal from.
So let me ask you this. This is my final question. I joked, we had a psychiatrist on yesterday about relationships, and I joked about my old joke about how if I ever get in a relationship again, I'll probably do oil change pre-work in psychology where we'll go to couples therapy, I don't know, every 3 months for the first while, just to keep, everyone waits until everything's a car crash and there's a junkyard of garbage, and then 10 years later, and then they're like, hey, let's try and fix this in couples therapy. And I'm just like, I think maybe I'll just start going to therapy early on. What do you recommend, maybe a way to sit down with each other once you kind of reach that stage of dating where you go, I think we're kind of exclusive, and I think we're kind of going to see how this rides out. Is it good to sit down and talk about some of these attachment styles and try and understand where each other are at? And I don't know.
Absolutely. It's such a great question. I love what you said. It's so funny. I would see clients who would come into my practice back in the day, and they would come in and they would be like resentment up to here, so full of resentment and anger that like as soon as you try to talk through one thing, they'd bring up like 9 other things from 17 years ago and 14 years ago and 11 years ago this happened. And it was like, and this visual would always come into my mind, like this big tangled ball of yarn that you have to unravel each piece so slowly. And so I do actually love the idea that like people proactively take action into these things in regards to therapy. It doesn't have to be therapy. It can be, we know our needs. And we check in with each other on a weekly basis. Are your needs being met? How are we doing? I really believe this, and I know this sounds like a pipe dream for people when they're newer to this work, but I believe this with all of my heart and soul. If you resent your partner and you're bickering because there's all this little bit of resentment, you have work to do. There's something unresolved. We shouldn't feel like relationships are like this, like build up slowly of resentment over the years. The idea is that we don't feel like that because we actually work through every conflict. When people are bringing up things from the past, the other thing too is it's because they feel unseen and unheard and unresolved. And to resolve conflict, we really need a few key things, and they're quite simple. We need each person to express what they feel and have the feelings validated. It doesn't have to be like, I feel so sad. It can be like, I felt uncomfortable when ABC happened. Yeah, I see why you would feel uncomfortable. That makes sense to me. So if both people can feel like their feelings are validated, and then both people can express what they need to feel relief from the situation and conflict. And if they can positively frame it, we can really work through any issue, like in real time, right? So if somebody's, there's this conflict, you're out with your partner and something happens, and each person gets to say, this made me feel uncomfortable. Here's what I need in the future. And the other person can say, yeah, I get that you felt uncomfortable. I can respect that. And I will work on that in the future. That makes sense to me. People drop the conflict. They leave it. They leave it in the past. Obviously, we can have these big, conflicts like somebody cheated and things like that require a little bit more nitty-gritty. There's a process for that too, honestly. But there's other ways of, things like that. But those daily conflicts or bickering situations or arguments that you have, if we can really hit those key points, it can go a very long way. But people often get the communication part wrong. People will say things like, you never spent enough time with me, instead of, hey, I feel like I miss you this week. We haven't spent a lot of time together. Can we, plan something fun to do on the weekend? So people won't communicate healthily, or they won't hit those key points, and they'll stay trapped in this cycle of resentment.
Wow. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a girlfriend in each of the 4 categories, just for the fucking fun and drama of it all, just for the entertainment. I'm going to have one gal who's anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant, and fearful, avoidant, disorganized. If you're married, just get 3 mistresses. And I'm just going to, I don't know. I'm just going to keep doing that till one of them stabs me. So that's pretty much how I used to date, I think, back in the day.
And then in your eulogy, it'll be like, Chris Voss chose to date 4 different attachment
4 different attachment styles. He lived dangerously with adventure, and he died with a knife. So there you go. But there you go. So this has been really insightful. And of course, the best ways people can learn all about this is to pick up your book. And then I think you do some coaching and stuff too as well. Do you want to pitch that out?
Yeah, so I was in private practice for about 10 years, and then I had a wait list for 2 years. So we do all online programs. So that's at personaldevelopmentschool.com. People can go to personaldevelopmentschool.com/free trial if they just want to go in and check it out for free and just see in there. But basically we have these boot camps. They're like 90-day cycles for how to become securely attached. So that is at the website. And then also, I don't do coaching anymore one-to-one, but my book is on Amazon, and it's called Learning Love, and people can find it on there.
And then you have a previous book too, I think, don't you?
Yes, the Attachment Theory Guide. It's like the introduction. I recommend the second one a little more because it kind of covers all the 4 attachment styles and how to find out what you are, what your partner is, but then it really puts a focus on how to heal.
There you go. I always joke about how I'm going to start going on first dates with psychiatrist cards to hand out. But I think I'm just going to tell people to check your channel. I'm like, have you watched her channel? So you should probably watch it between now and the next date.
And then tell me what you are. Tell me what your attachment style is.
Tell me what your attachment style is, Then or I'll just sit there with your book, and I'll sit there in front of them on the first date going, so how do you feel about your mother? And did they hook you up or something? I don't know, like a psychiatrist. It's been fun to have you on the show. Thank you for coming by the show. Give us your .com as we go out so people can check out everything.
Personaldevelopmentschool.com.
There you go. And order the book, folks, wherever fine books are sold. Stay away with those alleyway bookstores. You might get stabbed. That's where I got stabbed. Actually, it wasn't from the three gals in the attachment style. Got stabbed, robbed, and I don't know. It was fun. But so go to the best bookstore.
Scary stuff.
Learning Love. Build the best relationships of your life using integrated attachment theory, out December 8th, 2023. Thanks you for coming on by the show. Thanks to my audience for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss. Chris Voss on the TikTok, any all those crazy places on the internet. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. Learn your issues that you have and go get therapy for hell's sakes already. Thanks for tuning in.